So to continue on what you are getting out of your head and into your PhD, can you explain what IPR is and what perfume is? And why do or don't those two things go together?
Okay, so the PhD is about networks of power and accessibility in the fragrance industry. And one of those networks is intellectual property law, writ large, one of many. So how it relates to perfumery is how it relates to any creative practice in the intellectual property, forms who has access or doesn't have access to certain things. And also it forms how industry is run and controlled. So, I don't know if you want something more specific, but it's like one of the flavors in the soup of accessibility. And, in the film industry, for instance, when I was working at this TV network, there was this whole movement around peer-to-peer distribution. So one example would be people were pirating movies and releasing them in these networks that were uncontrolled. It was piracy networks, you know what I mean? And one friend of mine then, Jamie King, started a company called Vodo, where he was actually trying to figure out how one could, rather than fighting those piracy impulses, one could work with them in order to better the place of the independent filmmakers. So he started this thing, Vodo, where basically it was a peer-to-peer distribution network that was powered by donations. So people could donate, versus buy if they wanted to, or they also couldn't. And it was pretty successful. People made pretty legitimate money, not crazy amounts, but it was new in that space. And to me, that was very inspiring, that there's a way to harness or to rethink intellectual property in a way that both somehow respects the rights of the creator, because that's super important, but also allows the free flow of ideas and information, and most importantly, education. I mean, I'm still working it out, so I don't have the answer in fragrance, like check in 2 years, you know what I mean? But I suspect that there's a way to do it differently than it's done currently.
How is it done currently? Is
I
there
knew you were going to
IPR?
ask that. Well, it's complicated, but there's patent law which protects the process by which people come to a molecule or whatever. There's obviously trademark, which protects brands and brand identities. And then there's copyright, which famously in perfume, you can't copyright a formula. It's one of those cliches people tell you, and it's true. So people are trying to address it. Actually, notably, Christophe Lodemiel and some other folks have been trying to address it through the concept of trade dress. So applying trademark to scent by arguing that scent is part of the brand identity, for instance, like Play-Doh or Crayola crayons or Abercrombie and Fitch or whatever, these companies that are so strongly identified with the smell. So I'm not able to draw any conclusions. I'm just examining what's happening, you know what I mean? So, and then hopefully after a couple of years, I'll have some conclusions to draw, but it's curious. What there isn't really space for yet in fragrance is this idea of sort of copyleft or open source, or although it's changing, or Creative Commons. This interest originally came out of an interest I had in sort of how can we apply Creative Commons to fragrance? Like, can we apply the rules of Creative Commons or adapt them for fragrance creation, for formulas and so on? And some really interesting people in this space are Christophe Lodemiel, Fragrance Drama on Instagram, who's a really cool person based in Eastern Europe, has been publishing formulas. There's people interested in this space as well that I'm just sort of keeping an eye on.
Yeah, it's a very interesting but also very challenging area of
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, because my initial impulse was, of course, like, information needs to be free, creativity needs to flow. This is more important than your stupid bottom line. You know what I mean? Growing up a little bit, we all have kids and families and more. Like, I understand creatives need to be paid, or they need to survive. Otherwise we don't have art, it's just, and since we don't live in a society where we support creatives with government funding or anything like that, like the only tools they have at their disposal is their intellectual property. So I have a very nuanced view of it now, that I didn't have, say, 10 years ago. But yeah, maybe that will evolve further. I don't know.
I'm sure it will.